Kate Bender lived in a time when the frontier was wild, untamed, and full of travelers searching for land, hope, and fortune, and she knew how to use that restless hunger to her advantage. She was young, striking, and spoke with an air of mystery that caught the attention of all who passed through the dusty Kansas trails. She claimed to possess psychic gifts, to see beyond the veil between life and death, and to commune with spirits that could guide those who sought answers to their grief or uncertainty. This was not unusual for the era, as many believed in spiritualism and seances after the Civil War left so many bereaved. But for Kate, these claims were not merely for comfort or faith. They were bait. She used them to lure men and women into the inn her family built on a lonely stretch of prairie. The Bender Inn seemed like a sanctuary for travelers offering warm meals, kind smiles, and the promise of rest in a harsh and uncertain land. People were tired, lonely, and desperate for human connection, and the Benders appeared to offer it freely. Yet behind the soft words and the false hospitality lay a darkness that few could imagine. Kate's beauty and calm voice disarmed suspicion, and her claim of speaking with the dead drew. In those haunted by loss, she would host small readings in the parlor dimly lit by lanterns, where she would close her eyes and whisper to unseen forces, convincing her guests that she could see into their hearts and into the shadows of their lives. She made them believe that fate itself had led them to her door, and that through her they might find truth or fortune. Her charm was a weapon, her gaze both inviting and unsettling, and once her guests were seated with their trust laid bare before her, she and her family began to plot how to make them vanish for good. The Benders were not a normal family in truth. They were a partnership of killers, a man, a woman, and 2 grown children who worked together with eerie precision. They had crafted a trap within their humble home, one that looked ordinary but was designed for slaughter. Behind the curtain of their so-called seance room was a hidden space where the father waited with a hammer in hand, and when Kate gave the signal, he would strike the guest from behind. A single brutal blow to the skull would drop the victim instantly, and their body would be pushed through a trapdoor into the cellar below. There, the rest of the family would strip the corpse of money and possessions and bury it under the earth. Kate played her role with chilling perfection, never faltering, never revealing what lay beneath her gentle exterior. She used the language of faith and mysticism to lower defenses, to make strangers feel chosen and safe, in a place that was anything but for months, perhaps years. She repeated this ritual, a cycle of welcome, deceit, death, and disposal. Travelers disappeared without trace along that route, and few suspected the Benders at first, for who could imagine that a young woman claiming to speak with angels was in truth guiding souls to their doom. Yet whispers began to spread as too many men vanished and wagons were left abandoned, and when suspicion finally turned toward the inn, it was already too late. The Benders had fled, leaving behind only the bodies buried in shallow graves and the blood-soaked earth that told their story. Kate's role as a psychic had been her greatest disguise, for it gave her power over the fearful and the grieving, and it cloaked her cruelty in something that seemed divine. She did not kill with rage or passion, but with cold calculation, using her supposed connection to the spirit world as a net to catch the living. Her name became a legend whispered in fear across the frontier, and though no one ever found her or her family again, her story endured as a haunting symbol of deception and death. On the open plains, she was both a product of her time and a distortion of it, taking the fragile hope of belief and turning it into a weapon. And even now her tale remains one of the most unsettling examples of how the mask of kindness and faith can hide the darkest intent. The Bender family inn stood alone on the Kansas prairie, a small and weathered house surrounded by miles of open land where the wind carried secrets and the sky felt endless. Travelers stopped there because it promised food, warmth, and rest after long journeys. But behind its quiet walls lay a machinery of death that operated with eerie precision. Every member of the family played a role, yet it was Kate who drew the victims in her calm eyes, and soft words made strangers trust her. She spoke of visions of fate, of spirits that whispered truths only she could hear, and those seeking hope or fortune found themselves caught in her spell. She offered them comfort as they sat at her table. She asked questions about their lives, their journeys, their wealth, their families. She made them believe she cared, and when they felt safe, she led them to the room where she claimed to hold her readings. There, a heavy curtain hung across the wall, concealing the father with his hammer, waiting for the Signal the guest would be asked to sit in a specific chair positioned directly over a trapdoor. Kate would begin her ritual, closing her eyes, murmuring strange words, her voice low and entrancing. She would claim to feel a presence around the guest, to see the shapes of lost loved ones, but her words were only a distraction meant to draw the victim's gaze upward, while the shadow behind the curtain raised the hammer in silence. The blow came without warning. Swift and final, the sound muffled by the earth and the walls, then the body fell through the open trapdoor into the darkness below, where the rest of the family waited. Their routine was methodical, practiced, and heartless. They robbed the dead, stripped them of coins and goods, buried them in shallow graves behind the house or in the orchard, and then washed the floor clean, ready for the next unsuspecting soul. Kate's calm voice and unflinching demeanor made the whole act seem almost ritualistic, as though death itself obeyed. Her command, she did not hesitate, she did not mourn. She smiled as she served meals and told fortunes. Her role as a psychic gave her a power that her victims could not comprehend. She knew how to speak the language of grief and longing, and she twisted it into a tool of manipulation. Each murder was not just an act of greed but of control. The Benders chose their victims carefully, often travelers alone, or men with no one waiting for them back east, people who would not be missed quickly, and even if someone went searching, the vastness of the frontier made it easy to hide the truth. Weeks could pass before a name was remembered, months before questions were asked, and by then the prairie would have swallowed all trace of the crime. When lawmen finally came upon the abandoned inn, they found bloodstains that no scrubbing could erase, and beneath the floor the earth gave up its secrets. Body after body unearthed, silent witnesses to the evil that had been done. Each skeleton told the same story: the strike to the skull, the slit throat, the careful burial. The Benders had turned their home into a slaughterhouse, and Kate's gentle manner had been the lure that made it all possible. Her claim of psychic powers gave legitimacy to her deceit. She pretended to see visions, but what she truly saw was opportunity. Each person who crossed her path was a mark to be studied and taken, and she understood how to make them believe that fate itself had brought them to her. She used every weakness of the human spirit: the desire to know the future, the need to feel special, the longing to speak once more with the dead. Her performance was flawless, because it fed the hunger of her time when faith and superstition lived side by side, and people longed for miracles. She gave them one final vision before darkness claimed them. And though she vanished with her family before justice could be served, her crimes left behind a legend that stained the land itself. The inn became a ruin, a place whispered about in fear and awe, and Kate's name lived on as the smiling ghost of Kansas, the psychic who turned prophecy into death. Her beauty and her lies became symbols of a frontier where law came too late, and where trust could be fatal. The Benders worked together in silence, bound by greed and blood, but it was Kate who gave them power, for without her words, without her calm voice, their trap would have been just another crime of violence. She elevated it into something colder, more deliberate, a ritual of false faith and calculated cruelty. And in the echoes of that story we see how easily belief can be used to blind, and how beneath the promise of light there can exist an endless well of darkness. When the truth about the Bender family finally came to light, it sent waves of horror through the frontier. For years, travelers had gone missing along the lonely Kansas road, and no one could say why, until a search party reached the small inn that had once seemed so welcoming. The doors were open, the rooms were empty, and the silence carried a chill that spoke of things unseen. The family was gone, vanished without a trace, leaving behind the faint smell of decay and the dark stains that no one could mistake for anything but blood. When the searchers began to dig around the orchard, and beneath the floorboards they uncovered the bodies one after another, each telling the same terrible story: skulls crushed, throats cut, pockets turned. Inside out, the truth was undeniable. The Bender Inn had been a trap, a place where death came smiling through the lips of a psychic named Kate. She had used her soft words and her calm hands to make strangers trust her, had promised them comfort and guidance, and instead delivered them into the hands of murderers. As the news spread, people could not believe that such evil had lived so quietly among them. Kate especially fascinated and terrified the public. She was described as beautiful, intelligent, and charming. But behind those qualities was something cold and inhuman. She had spoken of spirits and visions, and people wanted to believe that perhaps some dark force had guided her. But others said it was not spirits at all, only greed and cruelty that drove her every act. The image of her leading a traveler to the chair where death waited became burned into the minds of those who heard the tale, and the thought of her smiling, as life drained from her victims, made her name legendary. Across the land, bounty hunters rode out searching for her and her family, but they found nothing. Some claimed she fled east under a false name. Others whispered she joined a new band of criminals in Texas or Colorado. A few even said she met her own end at the hands of those she once deceived, but no proof ever surfaced. She had slipped into the great emptiness of the frontier, leaving behind only stories and graves. The discovery of the murder shook faith in the growing settlements of Kansas, for if a quiet inn could hide such horror, what other evils might be waiting along the roads? The tale of Kate Bender became both warning and myth, a symbol of how appearances could deceive, and how darkness could hide behind beauty and belief. She had turned her supposed gift into a weapon, and in doing so destroyed the trust that bound strangers together on the open plains. People began to fear the kindness of others, wary that behind every smile there might be the same cold calculation that had lived in Kate's eyes. Her crimes were not only murders but betrayals of human faith, and they haunted the imagination of a nation still struggling to define itself in the wake of war and expansion. Writers and newspapers could not resist her story. They painted her as a witch, as a siren, as the devil in human form. Some called her the psychic of blood, others the enchantress of death. She became larger than life, a figure that blurred the line between fact and legend. And even as the years passed, her name refused to fade, for she represented something eternal: the danger of trust given too easily, and the price of believing in what we most wish to be true. Every retelling of her story added new details. Some imagined her leading rituals under the moon. Others claimed she could hypnotize her victims with a glance, yet at the heart of it all remained the same truth: a young woman who understood the fears and hopes of her time, and who used them not to heal, but to harm. The graves behind the Bender Inn became a place of dread, a silent reminder that evil can wear any face, and that even the gentlest voice may speak with a killer's intent. As the prairie grew and the towns rose around it, the story of Kate Bender passed into folklore. But those who knew the truth could never forget the sight of the earth being turned over and the bodies being carried out. One by one she had vanished, but the memory of her cruelty remained carved into the land itself, a scar upon the promise of the frontier, and in that scar lay the lesson of her life: that belief without caution can be deadly, that kindness can be a mask, and that sometimes the ghosts we fear are not the spirits of the dead, but the living who have no soul.